Kia ora and welcome to Baha'i on Air. Today we've got a special guest, Pax Assadi. Thanks for coming on the show.
No problem, bro.
Surprise, I'm an Arab. No refunds.
So you're a comedian. Do you want to share a little bit about your background?
I was born in New Zealand to a mother who's from Pakistan and a dad who's from Iran, who migrated to New Zealand. Grew up in Auckland, a regular childhood, a happy childhood. I started doing stand-up, started being a stand-up comedian in my late teens, early 20s. And yeah, that's where I am today. That's where I am now.
Growing up in New Zealand, what was it like? What were some of the challenges you faced with that kind of background?
Obviously, a lot of the challenges came with being different to the general public, you could say, like the people that I grew up with, the friends that I had. I was different. And obviously that brought a lot of challenges because I guess a lot of the peer groups that I was in weren't used to diversity yet. You can look at the society now and say that society is becoming more and more used to diversity and more conscious of the idea of getting rid of things like prejudice.
Like when I came out and I was introduced and I took the microphone, what was your initial thought of me? Like what was your first thought of me? Dirty sand-eating Arab, I know. And it's not your fault that you're a racist. Do you want to know whose fault it is? Do you want to know? Because I have an opinion on it. Good answer. Yeah, it's a problem in my life. Tell me. Here's why I think, I want to explain myself. Here's why I think it's the media's fault.
So what brought you into comedy?
First thing that kind of drew my attention was comedy itself, like seeing comedy. I saw a lot of people like Therese O'Neill, George Carlin. Like I saw these comics on TV growing up, and I was drawn to it. I was drawn to this idea of someone getting up on stage and making people laugh and making people happy and enjoy themselves. But then also, especially for a comedian like George Carlin, you can take him as an example, talking about ideas that actually meant something and talking about very interesting ideas.
The media, in my opinion, is possibly, very probably, the most powerful thing in our society. If you think about it, the media has the power to shape the way that we think, which is crazy. There's barely anything out there that can shape the way you think. It can shape the way you think about people, the way you interact with your environment, the way you interact with the people around you. It's amazing, right? It's crazy when you think about it. But here's the thing, I don't fully trust the media.
When I was younger, obviously all I cared about was the jokes and I would just laugh along with them. But then as I grew up, I started to realize that there's a certain power in stand-up comedy and there's a certain influence that stand-up comedy can have. I think it's very powerful for someone to get up on stage, not necessarily with any kind of reputation that would make an audience listen to you for an hour. Just because you're a stand-up comedian doesn't mean that you might have a PhD or that you're very learned on a certain topic. You're just getting up to tell jokes, but everyone listens to you. And it becomes a very powerful thing where you can utilize that as it's almost like a discourse that happens, a conversation that happens between you and the general public, which is very interesting. And so I was always interested in it, and at one point in my life, when I had about 18, 19 years old, I was like, that's it, I'm gonna do it. And I did it. And now I'm a stand-up comedian.
Everyone has seen the ranting Arab, right? Everyone has seen the ranting Arab. The Wallah Allah. Everyone's seen that guy, right? Here's what I don't trust. Why every time we see the ranting Arab, the voiceover or the translation is always a British dude's voice? Why? Every time. You hear Wallah Allah Allah Khamsa, and then you hear death to America, death to the Western world, and death to all the X Factor judges.
What themes do you draw on? What topics do you usually bring to your comedy?
A lot of the stuff that I talk about is based in the things that I know and the things that I'm very familiar with. So I talk a lot about race, and I talk a lot about the differences between race.
Because a lot of us, like here's the thing, a lot of us assume that the Middle East is a brainwashed place. A lot of us assume this. Now I'm not going to come out here and say that that's not true, because it's true to some extent. There are religious leaders out there, people out there telling them certain things, shaping the way that they think. So it's true to some extent, but what we have to understand is to some degree, we're just as brainwashed. Yeah? If you think about it, when you watch the news or the media and you watch a story on the Middle East, how is the Middle East being portrayed? Like 90% of the time. How is it being portrayed? Riots, violence, yeah? Those riots, for example, is only like 5,000 dudes, or like 1,000 dudes. It's not the whole country. So what, if you think about it, what's the rest of the 23 million people doing?
Underlying that, I'd like to talk about the fact that there are these differences, but then when it comes down to it, these differences they don't really matter at all. I talk about my wife, I talk about my grandparents, I talk about my childhood, growing up, things that I'm very familiar with. Because I think comedians who speak about things that they know have a sense of honesty that runs through what they're talking about. And that sense of honesty is more powerful than if I was just to like pluck random ideas from the air and try and be funny about them, or talk about things that I don't actually know about.
So all of your jokes is based on something real in your life?
Exaggerated.
Yeah.
You can say that, like, you take something that's real and exaggerate it and make it funny.
They're just at work. They're just living their lives. I want to be watching the news halfway through a story on like Syria. I want it to cut to Mustafa, just in an office. And he's like, hello, my name is Mustafa, and I'm just trying to get the printer to work. That's it. Nobody throwing any stones, nothing is on fire. Back to you, Dave. And then it just cuts back to Dave.
Sometimes there's things that are real in my life don't actually have an idea that revolves around it. It's just something that happened. But I can take what happened, that occurrence, and then talk about it in a context, which then gives it meaning and gives it a purpose. Like I could have had a funny conversation with my wife, and that funny conversation is funny, but that's all it is, just a funny conversation. But then I can extend that funny conversation and put it in a new context and exaggerate it, and now it's got so many different facets and it's got meaning to it. I think that's what comedy is. It's just reality exaggerated and seen from a different angle.
So you're a Baha'i. Tell us a little bit about your background and how that influences your comedy.
I was born into a Baha'i family. My grandparents are Baha'is, my parents are Baha'is. And I think it quite heavily influenced my comedy in a sense that it almost gives my comedy purpose. I do comedy for a reason. I don't see comedy as a road to just fame and fortune, even though it is a road to that, but there's a much stronger purpose within it, and that comes from my belief in the Baha'i faith.
In what way does some of the beliefs and the ideas in the Baha'i faith and the concepts influence your comedy? What does it do to change that?
In society, it's very easy for the general people in society, or for a generality of society, to think of stand-up as quite a negative thing, quite a destructive force, because it can be insulting and it can be quite crass and rude.
Yeah, but I'm married. I've only recently got married though. Like, it's not recent as in like a few months, recent like a year and a half, but it's still young. Like, it's still young. We're still working things out, figuring out how this whole thing works. Marriage is great. I like marriage. It's fun. It's enjoyable. You grow as an individual. It teaches you a lot, but it's hard.
I think as a Baha'i, and the principles that kind of have endowed my life as a Baha'i, and striving daily to make these principles a part of my life, has naturally affected the way I interact with stand-up now. In the Baha'i faith, we believe that that mankind is one, and that there are no divisions between race, that all people are one. And so then that idea, as a Baha'i, endows my actions. Everything I do is endowed with that principle because I believe in the Baha'i faith. So then the same goes with stand-up. So then the principles are kind of running through my material and the way I interact with people and everything. So I don't think that, like, I don't go up on stage and joke specifically about the Baha'i faith and talk about Baha'i principles, but the way that I interact with my environment as a stand-up comedian is endowed with Baha'i principles.
Earlier you talked about how race is maybe one of the themes that you draw on. Why do you think it's such a poignant or important part of comedy, maybe in general? Or
Why the idea of race is an important part of comedy, or why it's spoken about so much in comedy?
yeah.
I think if you really look at comedy for what it is and peel back the layers and see what comedy is in essence, comedy really is people looking at the tragedy of society and joking about it. It's essentially taking the inconsistencies in our society, the things that are actually broken in our society, and allowing us to laugh at it. But also not only just laugh at it, also highlight it and make it clear that it exists. When I joke about these things in my stand-up, I'm not joking about it just so that we can laugh about it and then let it pass us by. I do it so that we laugh about it, but then also it comes to our consciousness. When I say something about the way races interact with each other and the inconsistency within it, and why it's damaging or why it's good or whatever I'm joking about, I'm doing it so we laugh, but also so we're together, we're conscious of it, and we go, oh, actually, no, that is true. Wait, why is that? You know what I mean? And so that's why I think all these negative things are part of society, because comedy naturally highlights these things. That's what comedy does. Someone like a positive thing is never funny, but a destructive thing is, because what we're doing is we're peeling back society and looking at society internally and going, what's wrong with society?
Pax, you were saying that the principles influence your comedy. What are some of the ones that stand out for you?
I think all the principles of the Baha'i faith are part of my comedy and affect my comedy. It's very hard to say that some principles are more important than others and affect my comedy more. But I guess if you were to say some that maybe jump out at this point in time, I would say maybe the unity of the human race and the oneness of the human race, especially because of my background being multicultural and growing up in New Zealand and seeing how multicultural New Zealand is. So then that becomes a very clear topic. I guess also the equality between men and women, especially because I'm married, and I see that as a very important element of my life, and an element of my life that I strive to make sure is part of my life daily. So I guess those things like that seem important to me come through in my comedy quite clearly, but not to say that they're more important. I guess all the principles of the Baha'i faith are important in affecting my comedy and my life.
Marriage still shocks me. Marriage is still shocking to me. It still surprises me. It doesn't fail to surprise me. But it's not the surprising when my wife comes home and she's like, babe, I bought a toaster. And I'm like, wow, another one, that's great. It's more like sometimes I'll wake up in the morning and I'll be like, oh God, I thought it was Tina Turner, I'm sorry.
So you mentioned some of the principles. What are some of the ways in which these play out in the wider community in your social life?
I think the Baha'i community as a whole has kind of engaged very deeply and very meaningfully in this idea of community building, the building of communities in different settings and different environments, in urban cities all over the world, essentially. And a lot of these take form. All of them actually take form in education, the education of children, the education of young teens, and then adults as well, or people through programs that the Baha'i community has developed that are designed to build capacity within all these populations to give back to their communities and serve society in turn.
So what type of capacities are being built?
All forms of capacity that assists us to contribute to the betterment of society. Spiritual capacity to be able to reflect and to be able to draw on spiritual powers that assist us in times of need and in tough times. Intellectual capacity so we can think critically and analyze our environments. All these different things. Social capacity so that we can show different attributes that contribute to this process, like love and patience. All these capacities that are built within an individual allow us to contribute more meaningfully. And I guess the Baha'is are engaged in a systematic process of helping people, or not so much helping people, but together with other people. Because it's not about the Baha'is coming and giving people the tools to do it. We're not giving the remedy, but rather with everyone as one, as a unit. We want to build a better world. We want to contribute to a better society. And I guess I'm a stand-up comedian, but then I also am very meaningfully part of this process as well, and it affects my whole life as well.
So what type of activities do you do?
At the moment, my wife and I are working with groups of youth. We're working with groups of youth to build our capacities to work with younger youth. So then the older youth will become mentors almost to younger youth between the ages of 12 and 14, who we call junior youth, who are going through a very important time in their life. And the youth act as we call them animators, who act as almost mentors or true friends who want to guide them through this important time of their life so that they can become youth who are contributing to society as well. And this is a way that the youth contribute to society, by working with these younger youth.
You're saying that it's a mutual process, just as much as the youth are giving their time and their energy to the junior youth. The junior youth are also bringing out potential in the youth for developing themselves and building capacity. It's a two-way process.
This community building, this idea of community building, isn't an idea where we don't see it as someone comes in and assists people to be better, but rather it's something that happens at the grassroots, something that happens at the level of the community. So that's why the ideal is that the youth from the community are the ones that work with the junior youth from the community, and together they work together to lift the environment that they live in, to raise the spiritual character or the devotional character of the neighborhood, and the relationships between the people and all these different things. And as well as the adults, like the parents of the junior youth and the youth have just as much of a part to play, you know? Like, it's this process where when we talk about community building, we mean we don't come in and build parks and build basketball courts, and that might be part of it, and that might be something that the youth decide to do as a way to contribute.
Just build a park.
Yeah, just build a park, and then boom, the community is better. But that's just one element. There are so many other facets that require everyone to work together very closely for it to come to fruition. The building of communities leads to the betterment of society. The communities developing in all different elements, the social, the spiritual, the material, leads to the betterment of society, not just a top-down approach where someone comes along and says, here's the solution.
Here's the money.
Here's the money, you're done. But rather, and that might contribute to it in some way. We're not saying that, no, that's not a part of it, but rather there needs to be so many different elements that come from the bottom up, the grassroots.
So a holistic approach that's trying to create an ever-advancing civilization.
Yeah, absolutely.
So recently there was a youth conference in Auckland. Do you want to explain a little bit and share with the audience what that was about?
Recently there was guidance from the Baha'i World Center, which is in Israel, the kind of governing body of the Baha'i world. And this the Baha'i World Center called for 114 youth conferences to be held around the world. At almost every corner of the world there were these youth conferences that were held. And there were for youth, not just Baha'i youth, but youth from any background, any religious, cultural background, to come together and explore this idea of community building and to explore this idea of contributing to a better world, or to the building of a better world, I should say. So the youth came together, and there were youth that were interested in this process. And so in Auckland there was a conference, and the youth came together. I can't remember how many, I think there was almost 500 youth that came to the conference. And they came together, and there were workshops. We were split up into different groups. There were workshops and discussion groups and arts projects that were held to kind of share in a different, other than just verbal discussions, in a different form, the ideas that we were exploring. And some of the ideas that we were exploring were ideas like mutual support, and the age of adolescence, you know, the age of young youth, and why it's such an important age to serve humanity.
So you spoke about this simultaneous growth, this balancing your life, your everyday life with service and all of this other stuff. What are some of the challenges that come with that?
I guess there are a lot of perceived challenges. Like I think it's very easy to think, okay, these are different elements of my life. It becomes, oh, now life is harder, it's more difficult. But I think one of the things that we discussed was this idea of service being central to one's life. And so, yes, there are very practical and very tangible ways to contribute to society. For example, being a junior youth animator, or painting over graffiti that may be painted over someone's fence and contributing to their environment by doing that. There are these tangible ways to contribute. But one thing that became quite clear is that service isn't something that's separate from our life. If we truly want to contribute to the betterment of society, and if we truly want society to grow and develop towards a civilization that is more prosperous, service has to be something that is central to our lives. That comes back to, for example, stand-up, where stand-up comedy, I don't have stand-up comedy and service. I see my stand-up comedy as service. Service is central to that as well. That kind of came through when we were discussing that, this idea of integration, that we don't want to dichotomize the different elements of our life and say this is that, this is that, this is that, but rather try to see it as an integrated whole. That I know that I want to serve humanity. I love stand-up comedy and I want to be a stand-up comedian, but service doesn't leave that sphere. I want to contribute to society through this sphere that I'm doing also, and through my family. I'm married and I'm gonna have kids soon down the line. It's family life, but then it's also contributing to society in another way. I want to raise children who are loving and accepting of all people. You know, it's another contribution to society. And see, all these elements are one whole.
We don't even need TV. We don't even need 6 o'clock news because we got social media, which is amazing. We've got that social media now. We don't even, I didn't watch a single lick of the America's Cup, but I knew exactly what was happening. I knew exactly what was happening when it was happening. It's amazing, right?
What we were talking about before, my multicultural background, I feel like I bring a view that comes from a different angle. Because if we really be honest about it, stand-up comedy in New Zealand and comedy in New Zealand is very saturated by the white male. And that's not to say that that's a bad thing, it's just to say that that's how it is at the moment. So I feel like just my view from where I've come from brings a different angle. And then also this idea that I'm a Baha'i and I want to be talking about, I want comedy to mean something, also comes in from another angle. So then you have all these different facets of my life that infuse my comedy and it makes me different. Not to say that comedy right now in New Zealand is not good, but there's definitely room for people with different voices to be heard in New Zealand comedy right now.
Twitter to me is the platform we've given to everyone to say whatever you want. Doesn't matter how retarded you are, doesn't matter what you do, doesn't matter what, everyone has a platform to say what they want, and it's created this weird relativism that just messes with your head. Because there's so many diverse things that you can read on Twitter, and it messes with you. I'll give you an example. Of what I mean. I was on Twitter, and what I saw a post, and what it read was, the master key to self-mastery is self-forgetting. I read that. That is deep. Someone had seen that quote, posted it on Twitter, and boom, it helps people. It could help people. You might just flick through it and whatever, but you might read it and go, that's amazing, I like that, that's interesting, right? Directly underneath that, there was a post that said, have you ever pooed, wiped, and there was nothing on the toilet paper? Hashtag ghost poo. Useless. No one can use that. That was my tweet.
Anyone who is of a different, oh, not just anyone who of a different background, anybody at all that is watching this and wants to get into the arts, comedy, poetry, writing, singing, whatever it may be, like be a musician, I think they should definitely go for it wholeheartedly, because I think people who enter into these fields with a sense of purpose and a desire to do it with quality, but then also to have substance, true substance, will contribute to the betterment of society no matter what. And I think I truly believe that all areas and all fields of endeavor need to transform and need to advance. Evolve. Yeah, that's a good word to use. Evolve. It's not just like development and education, and these are very important endeavors in our society. But I think all endeavors need to transform, and if we wholeheartedly partake in these endeavors, society will truly advance.
Because everything's connected.
Right, everything's connected.
It's like a circle of life.
Absolutely, yeah.
Thank you guys. My name is Pax. You guys have been amazing. Thank you so much.
So thanks for joining us today, Pax.
No problem. I enjoyed it. Did you enjoy it?
Yeah, it was lovely.
Thank you.
Yeah. And thank you for joining us on Baha'i On Air. Hope to see you next time. Ka kite anu.
Go for it. Actually, if you're really funny, don't. If you're like really, really funny, don't do it because I want a job. If you're kind of funny, do it. And if you're not funny, don't do it. So if you're in the middle, do you get that? Because what we're doing is we're peeling back society and looking at society internally and going, what's wrong with society?
So society is an orange.
Yeah. Yeah, it's like an orange, yeah, that you peel back and it's delicious. Yeah. I like to look at society as a banana, to be honest. In the Baha'i community?
Yeah. No, the Mormon community.
And at that point in my life, it was hard for me to commit.
And thank you for joining us. Oh. And thanks for watching.
Thank you. Thank you, Rewa.